3D AI generated models are great, but most of the times they still lack a lot of detail. In today's video we are going to have a look how you can add stunning detail to your 3D models in Blender. And at the end of this video you will have a detailed 3D model that you can use for a printing, for example, or for your own personal projects. Having said that, let's dive right into it. So to get started, first thing we need to do is we need to have Blender installed. So if you haven't that already, I will put you a link down in the description. Otherwise, only thing we need to have is of course to have 3DAIstudio open, and then we need to decide which models we want to use for improvement. And I chose to have a statue to show you how you can actually add detail with the statue over here. Only thing you need to do to make sure that it's working is first it will be a GIB file when you generate an image to the image to 3D workflow I showed in another video. And then what you need to do is actually to go to process and then choose here remesh. And once you're in the remesh, you can then choose either the OBJ file or FBX will also work. But I chose for this example mainly the OBJ format. And then once you chose OBJ, you then have to make sure that you don't merge any vertices. They have to be off, so we get a nice topology on the mesh itself. And you have to choose textures as separate file. And only thing you need to do is then hit remesh over here. Once you have downloaded then both files, we need to open a new Blender file. The first thing you're seeing is that we have a cube in the scene. To delete it, you just have to press X and then hit on delete. Once you have done that, we can then import our generated 3D mesh. So what we have to do is only go to File, Import, and then choose OBJ. Once you have done that, a new window will open, and what we will do is then just hitting on the path where we downloaded it and you saved your file, and then go to your folder. You will see your folder will first look like this, so it has a very weird naming. So what you have to do actually is only to rename first, what I can really recommend, otherwise you might get lost in your files. So just rename it and then you can go into your folder. For example, here we would choose the statue one, hit here on data, and then open it, and then you will see here are two files, MTL and OBJ, and we will use the OBJ file. As you can see, we have here the base model, and now as you can see it's quite flat, and we want to add additional details on it so we can 3D print it later. We first need to check out if it has a texture attached to it. And how we can do that is we can press Z in the viewport, and then we see we have wireframe, material preview, solid, and render. So what we want to check is of course under material preview if there is a material already assigned to it. And as you can see, that's the great thing about 3DAIstudio. When you download a mesh, even when you remesh it, you can actually see that there is material attached to it. And we will use this material actually to add then more detail to our 3D model. Next thing we need to do, we will go for now back to the solid mode, pressing Z again and then to solid. What we will do is then we will navigate here to the modifiers tab and we will add a modifier. And in this case we will add a displace modifier because we will using our texture map that is assigned to the 3D model as additional detail and injected kind of onto the mesh to have additional detail. We will just hit the displace button, and as you can see our model will instantly blow up. So we will first lower the strength on this one. It's set to default by 1, but we want to lower it to something like 0.02 maybe, but we will play around with the strength later on. Because first thing we need to do then is of course plugging in the map, and how we can do that is that we hit here on new and it will automatically assign the texture to it. Next thing we have to do is we need to change texture, and to do that and upload our texture file is that we go to texture over here. We go here to this little icon over here. If you downloaded it with FBX and chose separate files while downloading the mesh, then you will have it also in the folder and you can just select it, and then you could go over here, for example, in a draft new, which I downloaded as an FBX, and then you would hear the base color which you would need. But for this case, when you download it as an OBJ, you don't have that by default because it's already attached into scene and imported. So what we need to do is we go over here and we already see we have here base color attached. This is of course in a much easier way because then we can just directly select it over here. So when we disable it here, for example, we already see there's a big change going on. What we also need to do is we we need to change our coordinates from local to UV because our mesh is UV based, so basically texture based, and we want to use the UVs on the mesh to project the detail. So basically you can see it's then changing back to the default strength, let's say, and what we can do is then we can increase the strength a bit so we see the effect more. It's already better kind of because we see more structures over here on the head and also on the body itself. But what we want to do is, and there the real magic happens, is that we add subdivisions to our file, and this will basically subdivide the topology that we have on the mesh itself. So we'll get a lot more detail on the mesh, like all those squads here will be subdivided and we will get more detail there. So what we have to do is we add another modifier, and this modifier is then called subdivision surface, and we will see we have a new modifier over here. The first thing we need to do is go here to the little arrow here on the right and then move to first. The reason for that is that the mesh needs first to be subdivided before we displace the texture on it, and we already see that makes a big difference. You can also increase here the viewport samples. Be careful here because when you choose a value of like 7 or 8 or even 6, it's going to take a lot of time. But for example, a value of 3 works always great, and we already see it's way more detailed than we had before. So when we look at the comparison, this is without the subdivisions and this is with, and we actually see we have way more detail on the mesh itself. By the way, this video is heavily also inspired by the workflow from Architects. So actually also check him out. He did a great video also about this workflow, but I wanted to show it mainly for 3DAIStudio, which I think is great, and it works for basically all models from 3DAIStudio. So definitely a great workflow and also a channel from his side, so definitely check him out. Okay, great. And once you have done that, we need then go into the sculpting mode of Blender. And to do that, to add even more detail in sculpting and fix any issues that we have on the mesh itself, we can then go here into the sculpting on the top, and then we go directly in here. And as you can see, I already applied the subdivisions as a test, and to do that also with the displace, because you don't see it here anymore, what you need to do is then only go here and hit here apply, and you need to do the same with the subdivision modifier, because then we can paint really smoothly into the sculpting. We can just hit here the draw brush or another brush, and what you can do is then basically to paint out any issues that we have with mesh or sculpt additional details. So what you can do, for example, is here paint out this area. What you need to do is then only hit shift and left mouse button, and then we can smooth out any issues that we have on the mesh at the moment. Only important thing is really that you apply the modifier. We can also, for example, just hit left mouse button and you can see it's pulling out details over here, and as you can see we can then also pull out details that we would like to have, so get more detail onto the mesh itself. Otherwise you can also do the opposite as well. You can just hit Control and left mouse button, and as you can see it will drag down details that we have on the mesh here. And yeah, you can basically get crazy with it and play around, and yeah, see you when I am done with the sculpting to show you the difference then. Okay, great. And this is actually the final result. This took me like 10 minutes, I would say, which was quite quick. And now we have way more additional detail. You can see it here now in comparison, the before and after. And I will show you now a quick way how you can 3D print the final result, basically. So how you can export it for your 3D print. So basically, only thing you need to do, let's go into the layout maybe again. You might need to upscale it. It depends on your 3D printing software where you want to do it. But basically, most of the times I needed to upscale it quite a lot. So basically something like this here would work much better. You see it's huge in Blender space, but actually it works for the 3D printing. So play around with that. You can also always upload it then on your 3D printing website, or when you have a 3D printer yourself. When you have then defined a scale, only thing you need to do is you press Ctrl and A and then apply the scale on the mesh itself. So we have actually a scale of 1 over here, so that it's actually frozen. And then only thing that is left to do is actually that you then hit on File and then Export, and then you choose here .stl, then you hit OK, and this is a really good format to 3D print, and then you just save it wherever you want to have your file. Besides that, there's also of course another way when you just want to 3D render it maybe in your project to add additional detail. There we don't need to sculpt anything or displace anything. The only thing we will need to do then is again, actually we go to File, Import, and then import the dwarf. So this is basically the imported dwarf then, which I imported as an FBX file. And what we can then do is actually display it again with the texture to see if it's there, and you see it's working, which is great. And then what we will do is we will go to this shader editor on Blender, and to do that is actually we can go just over here, click on it, and then we go here to shader editor, and we see we have here already our maps plugged in, which is great. And we see we have a normal map. By the way, this is happening when you do your 3D meshes in the sketch mode on 3DAIstudio, so basically over here. So then it's PBR per default. So PBR means that you have all those maps like base color, metallic roughness, and the normal map. And as well when you go to the regular and then choose here the material option PBR. This is also explained in one of my previous videos which I did for 3DAIstudio, so you can also check it out there. Okay, and here you can actually see also the mesh 3D printed. So I think actually it worked really good. We have different comparisons here. So one time we have it without any adjustments, one time we have the sculpting mesh, and one time we have it displaced only with all the sculpting improvements from the stage here. And I think it's looking great. Just make sure that you always convert it one time and remesh it one time before you download it and then put it into Blender. But basically this is the workflow, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know down below, and of course don't forget to subscribe to the channel.